Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. I am your host, John DeLynn, and I am joined by my amazing, wonderful, thoughtful, talented co-host, Carah Burrell. Hey, Carah.
Hey, John. Hey.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
You ready to do this?
Yeah. Part 3. I hope everyone else is ready. We're having a good time, keeping the good times rolling.
Mm-hmm. We are here with Lizzy and Spencer Bean, and we've done 2 episodes so far. Hey, guys. Thanks for joining us. Part 1 was Lizzy's epic Mormon story, and part 2 was Spencer's epic Mormon story. And I think it might be one of the most LDS church affirming 2 episodes we've ever done on Mormon Stories
True
podcast.
Mormon Stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Carah?
Yeah.
You're proud of that.
Yeah. I was just telling John in the break that it feels really good to let people know like how much you guys cared about the church, how much I did, or John, the things that like really pulled us in, gave us meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And then as we're going to get into in this part 3, why that had to unravel at some point. But
Why that makes it hard.
why it makes it so hard. Yeah.
And basically, we're not haters.
No.
For all the people that think we're haters, we're not.
That's true.
Anyway, part 3 is kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's one of our classic types of Mormon Stories episode interviews where we talk about the faith journey of a couple, because we now reach the point in the narrative where Spencer's coming home from his mission in from Sweden. He's raised in Utah County, Mormon. Lizzy is living in Utah County, having transplanted there from upstate New York with parents who are converts, but she's living in from Utah terms, kind of the semi-ethnic kind of Utah Mormon experience where she's standing out a tiny bit because she has an Eastern accent. Oh my goodness. And a little bit of confidence and intelligence. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Not blonde, like all the wrong things. Anyway, Spencer's coming back from his mission, and we're going to talk about their union, and then their Mormon union, and then how the faith, where the faith journey takes them in their Mormon union. So where's a good place to start as we pick up about your union, about your marriage?
I think kind of picking up where my episode left off,
I think so.
We kind of talked about how we met doing theater locally and how we reconnected at BYU working at the same office. And
by the way, that reconnection happened about 3 months off of my mission.
Yeah,
I went home, immediately jumped into summer semester, had this job at BYU.
Yeah.
Provo.
Yeah, BYU Provo,
BYU Provo,
2008.
taking sociology classes and got hired. And then 3 months later,
I got
Lizzy
hired at the same
got
office.
hired at the same office. So this was really
Coincidentally?
quick on my mission.
Totally coincidentally.
Absolutely
Yep.
coincidence.
Because you had known each other before.
Yeah, and it was a very, we were friends when we were in the shows together, but it was a very loose friendship. We just kind of keep an eye on each other. But yeah, then we just randomly got hired at the same place, and I was like, hey, I know you, Spencer Bean, and
And again, you were both students at BYU?
Yeah.
Provo? Okay. Okay.
I love holding your hand, but I want to gesticulate as I talk.
That's fine. That's fine.
I held his hand when you started doing the intro, and it was really lovely and romantic, but I got to express myself.
Well, the
that's
BYU romance is a thing.
Yeah.
Margie and I met at BYU, so I'm.
the big goal of going to BYU is to find the one and settle
parents,
down.
My parents did.
Yep.
It's one of the Mormon Church's largest single expense items is BYU Provo, BYU Idaho, BYU Hawaii, LDS Business College.
Yep.
That is one of the Mormon Church's single biggest line items, and it literally a primary reason. Well, it's to give kids a faithful education so they don't lose their kids to the secular world.
Yep.
Right.
And it's to get their kids married to other Mormons so that they can keep
Friends
them
with other Mormons.
keep them on the track. Yeah. So
Whole
you
community.
guys, so tell us about,
Yeah, so we started working together and getting to know each other. I tried to set him up with a roommate of mine because, like I mentioned, I was kind of low-key waiting for a missionary to come home. And you were kind of low-key waiting for a missionary too.
I was, yep.
She came home and you dated for a minute, and then
Got smart.
you saw the
Got
light.
smart.
And honestly, even at the time, it was smart. I give you crap about it only just because it's fun.
I needed the closure.
Yeah.
I needed that closure.
And I needed you to have that closure. So it was a long couple of weeks, but after that, you came back and said, "Hey, we should date," and I said, "Yeah," and
Duh.
yeah, we started dating. We dated for 6 or 8 months, and then got engaged. And there was a little bit of
Quite
drama.
a long engagement by BYU standards. Long engagement.
Yeah. So it was both because we dated for 8 months, six or eight. I mean, it depends on where you define when we started dating. But then I had told my sister that we were thinking of getting engaged. She's older than me, and long story short, 2 days later, her husband was up asking to marry my sister. And so we had to kind of put things on hold. And so we were engaged for 8 months, which is long by BYU standards. And that was really hard. That was really hard for me. I was really confused because my parents were not happy about me being engaged at the age of 19. And looking back, I don't blame them, but also everyone was. We talk, at the time we talked, and we still talk about how we totally got married because of peer pressure. Yeah. Our roommates were getting married. Our friends were getting married. That was like the next natural step, I guess. If we were going to stay together, it was going to be marriage, because
it was marriage or break up.
It was marriage or break up, because you don't want to date so long that like you put yourself in a situation you might be physically inappropriate before marriage. And so it was like, well, I guess that's what we have to do. And so we started moving forward with that. My parents weren't super happy with that, and I get that kind of. We only have 2 kids in my family, so my sister's flying the coop, and then I'm flying the coop, and I get why that would be hard.
But like very rare for Mormon parents to be concerned about how young their daughter is getting married.
Yeah.
And the only reason your parents were that way was because they were converts.
They were converts.
And they grew up back east where you didn't do stuff like that because they were a little bit more advanced and civilized. As Carah's parents, maybe a little bit different story, maybe.
Who knows what's going on in my parents' head?
Anyway.
But yeah, similar, the converse, different mentality. And so that was one of the first times I considered, like, I don't understand. I was born into the church. I've done everything by the book, got baptized, young women, I'm at BYU. Many people say the point of BYU is to get married. And here I'm doing the thing with this great guy, eternal marriage. Like, what's the problem? Like, so that was the first time I don't know. I just didn't understand that.
I'm checking all the boxes.
Yeah, it was really hard. Your parents were great.
My parents were.
There was no problem there. And
well, I wasn't.
And
19.
it's not that my parents didn't like you. It's just that I was young and they didn't. They didn't like that age thing, the choice we were making. But
you were Mormon.
Yep, and that's what you do, and everybody does. And so we did, and we got married in January of 2010.
So you were 19.
I was 20 when we got married, but 19 when we got engaged. Okay. Yeah, and you were 23.
23 when we got married.
Yep. Yeah. On plan. That's on plan.
Yep.
It's on plan. Provo Temple.
Yeah. Provo Temple, because they have bigger rooms, so you can invite more people. And I love them mid-century vibes. So we got married, January 2010. And that, again, like, this is really when we started to have to face some of that hard stuff. I guess yours started on your mission, but I distinctly remember, like, month 2 of marriage, we pulled up in front of our little apartment and we looked at each other, and it was like, this is not what we expected.
Marriage?
Yeah.
Yep.
And we kind of even discussed, like,
what did you expect?
Not that.
Yeah, not that.
We were both really good at being single, first of all, very social. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of your social life goes away. It's like married couples hang out with married couples. Single people don't hang out with married couples because single people have to hang out with single people so they can become a married couple. So, and also, if you recall, I was playing trombone. Most of my friends were in the low brass section. All my friends were guys. I was a marriage prospect until I wasn't. And so I lost a lot of my friends because it was like no longer a good investment for them. So we just both kind of became a little bit lonely pretty quickly. And, it's hard to live with someone and learn to integrate your lifestyles or whatever. And I remember a couple months into being married, we looked at each other like, is this good?
Did we make a mistake?
Did we make a mistake?
Can we get this annulled?
Yeah, we talked about, is there temple annulment? Is that?
Were you fighting?
No.
Was it intimacy, like physical intimacy?
No. And I will say, because that's actually part of our story is birth control kind of screwed me up hormonally, and
it does. It often does.
And so my getting on birth control a couple months before getting ready to get married killed my drive. And that was really hard. So like that was a little bit a part of it, but it wasn't a driving factor. It was just really, we've always worked well together. That's how we kind of reconnected, is working, and we communicate well. And so we just sort of sat quietly in this car and just very freely and calmly admitted to each other that neither of us were like really digging it.
Super happy. You weren't happy like you thought you should
exactly.
be.
We weren't miserable. Right. It wasn't fighting. It wasn't, and that was the weird thing, is like, well, there's no real problem.
There's no reason.
There's no reason. We're just both a little bit like, it's just a little lackluster. But again, because there was kind of no reason to split up, it was like, well, I guess this is what they mean when they say like marriage is a little bit hard sometimes. Marriage is work, and it just, for some reason, we were able to see very clearly early on that like peer pressure, the church pressure got us into something that maybe we weren't quite ready for, but we sure as, I'm just saying it, sure as hell, there's my swears on the Mormon Stories. We sure as hell lucked out finding each other who were willing to learn and grow together and be curious about it and not kind of cast blame or judgment, that we were both in a similar place so we could just be there together and grow from there. That was good. But yeah, that was the first time where it was like, well, this is not the fairy tale that you're promised making your engagement capsules in Young Women's, you know? It's like, okay. And we both were on the same page with kids. That was another thing, is like, we didn't jump right into having kids because neither of us wanted that right away. We always said like 5 years at least until kids. So it was like, we were just kind of waiting for that point. So it was like, well, we can't have kids. We're not having kids yet. So I guess we just have each other and we just got to figure it out.
But so you're still active in the church though at this point, right?
Oh, 100%.
Like,
Very much.
Yeah, yeah.
callings and stuff. Because there is that old saying in the church that like any couple can make it work if they center Christ in their
Yeah.
home. Any active couple
Totally.
can make it work.
Yep.
Yep.
Is that kind of what was in your mind? Like, we're staying active in the church. We can work through this.
Yeah,
Yep. That was definitely part of it.
The church definitely played a role, but more than the church, I mean, we were just interested in figuring out kind of our relationship with each other. We're interested in figuring out our dynamic together because we did work together. We were spending pretty much all day together.
Yeah,
we
'cause of
would
working on
work
campus
together,
together.
and then we would go home together, and it was more just trying to figure out how to live with another companion 24/7.
Yeah.
But the church, again, back to that rock, to that foundation of church, we jumped right into the home ward in Provo, and it was a lovely experience. We were in charge of taking pictures of new members.
That's right.
Moving
The
into
ward
the ward
directory.
and putting it up on the ward directory. So we got to meet all the incoming people and make them feel welcome, and that really jived with kind of our personalities of being very social. So that I think that helped feed that need for social contact.
Flip side of that coin,
marriage.
our bishop was 27 years old.
Yeah.
And had 3 little kids in this just south of BYU campus.
Normal family ward.
And that was weird for us. Like, we felt bad for him. And that was the first time where we considered, like, is this the best leadership choice? He, I think, was still a student.
I can't remember if he was a student.
Fresh out,
right.
like-
but I started thinking back to when I was a kid and like my dad being gone on something, like what it means to have your dad as a bishop. And my dad was called as a bishop at 12, and these kids, their dad was
they were
called
like
as a
4
bishop
and
when they were
6.
4, you know?
Like, whoa. He was a great bishop. Like, he was a very
he
loving,
was
caring man. But
phenomenal.
we both, like, felt bad for him.
Sure.
And that was the first time that ever hit us. So that, early marriage was just kind of an interesting, tumultuous thing that we just frankly weren't prepared for, and just made the best of it, did the best we could, and thankfully made the choice to stick together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably not uncommon. Margie and I had not a great first 7 years for sure.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I'm sure others feel differently, but
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just gonna check out like my key points here.
I think the next thing, I mean, we lived in Provo and then we moved to Orem. We bought a house.
well,
and
yeah, faith-wise, what was the next thing?
faith-wise, the next thing was probably depression.
Yeah. So I graduated before Spencer did. I was finishing my last semester, winter of 2012, but then I had an internship into 2013, and or maybe it was end of 2011 into anyway, something like that. So it was wintertime, and my last semester, and because, like I mentioned, I had front-loaded all my classes in my major. I was taking ensembles and performing credits, and it really filled up my schedule my freshman, sophomore, junior year. So my senior year, I was taking like Bio 100. I was taking like all my GEs because I had just waited, and it was just a real bummer of an ending to schooling, that I was just like, I had to go back and take all these entry-level classes that I just ignored because they weren't interesting to me at that time. And I finished those classes. I was doing this internship, and we had bought a house. This was 2011, so the market was still pretty low, and I was really good with saving my money. And so we had enough to do, FHA loan, and we had a little house, and we immediately adopted dogs because that's who we are. And we were married, obviously, and I was graduating, and I was 21 years old and had checked off every life checkbox except for kids, which I knew I didn't want for at least 4 more years. And I was in this job that was pretty good. It was a 40-hour-a-week job, but like, cool. So I just sit here all day for the rest of my life for the next 80 years
Endure to the end.
Until it's time for kids. And I have kid baggage, and my perception of that was until my life ends for me to have kids and I could get to completely lose myself and just devote the rest of my life to them. Great. And I kind of spiraled. Like that was not a great time. And that's the first time I started working with a therapist who diagnosed me with anxiety and depression for the first time in my life. And I even remember I was only 2 quote unquote wrong answers away from like a full PTSD diagnosis of just built up little traumas throughout my life. And that's the first time I actually, because I was like, I'm not a war veteran. I haven't been through divorce or lost a spouse. Like that's trauma. And it's like, no, that's the first time I was taught that like, no, little things along the way, moving a lot as a kid, losing pets, losing grandparents. Like these are little T traumas that build up and affect you and live in your body if you don't deal with it. # Mormons aren't great at grief. It all was building up, and I had to confront that for the first time in my life. And Spencer was still getting his master's. He did a master's degree. So he was like head down, focused on school, and being the personalities we are, when he's hyper-focused, he's a little checked out from life and checked into that. So I was feeling a little bit like there, this is the distance with us, and that I'm depressed out of my mind. And that was hard on our marriage. It was hard on me. And this was the first time in my life where my church activity started to wane, and I actually gave myself permission to do so. We had a calling. We were teaching Sunday school to like 14, 15-year-olds. Loved that calling, loved teaching them. Second hour, this back when church was 3 hours. And we were their teachers every other week. And there was a time where I was only going to church every other week for that hour, because that's like all I could handle, the social anxiety of going to church, having to put on this face of like, happy Sunday, Ward, when I was feeling like crap and could barely get out of bed and everything was hard. And we started doing marriage therapy at that time too. So this was probably 3 years into our marriage.
Good for you.
And first of all, we always say like, everyone everywhere needs to see a therapist at least once in their life.
Please,
period.
please, please.
Like just do it. Even if you think you don't need it. Just like a physical checkup with your doctor, go get a mental checkup with your therapist. Second of all couples should see a marriage counselor at least once in their marriage. You don't have to have a problem to learn how to communicate better. Anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. All that to say, as you can see, it was probably a really healthy thing that we did that. And how many weeks were we there where our sweet therapist, we did it through BYU. BYU has great resources.
CAPS, the counseling center?
Yeah. Counseling center at BYU. And this I think she was like a grad student, and she was awesome. And she basically said, well, are we doing therapy to keep you together, or are we doing therapy to help you split amicably?
Ooh.
And we did not have an answer for her.
Sounds like a non-Mormon.
For like 3 or 4 or 5 weeks in a row, we just would sit there and kind of talk about things that had happened, but still never really have a concrete answer for her.
She would always end with,
what's the decision?
She would always start with, are we
what are we
together
doing here?
Or are we splitting? And it was always like,
wow.
And that was that was an interesting thing to consider, especially with the logic that Spencer and I approached our early marriage with, of like, did we make the right choice? We were totally not prepared for this. What even the heck is going on? But by this point now we own a home together, and we'd been married for 3 years. Our families were more ingratiated with us, and we had these dogs, and it was like, well, we saw these 2 paths, and they were both going to be really hard. And it was just choosing like, do we push through the discomfort of communication and this emotional work and try and make a go of it? Or do we push through and have to tell our families we're splitting up and split up our assets and heartbreak and all that?
Figure out how to split up the dogs.
Yeah, that was like,
because
we had to.
For me, that was a big
because we're
sticking
suckers.
point. What do we do with these 2 dogs?
Right. Thank goodness for them, because we had to ask that question. And we chose the try and stay together path. And once again, thank goodness. So that was an interesting time, because there was a lot of guilt about me not going to church, but I also didn't feel like I even could. So, and I didn't feel like I could like tell my parents about it, because I didn't want them to think, because there's a little bit of a generational difference in, mental health and therapy understanding. I didn't want them to think, A, that something was wrong with me, or B, that it was all happening because I wasn't going to church. I didn't want to tell them I was depressed and that it was hard to go to church, because I was worried they'd just say, well, just go to church and then everything will get better. It creates this weird cycle of shame. And so now for the first time in my life, I'm withholding information kind of from my parents, because I don't feel like I can be open, because I'm fear their judgment. So that was kind of the first time that I had to deal with church activity issues, I would say. Right?
And about this, are you wrapped with that? Should I tell
Yeah. You can go on whatever's next. I don't know.
Around this same time, I was working on my master's degree at BYU. I did a 5 years to get bachelor's and master's. So I was in 4th year. I had 1 year left, and it was around this time that Lizzy was really depressed and having a hard time. And I went into the bishop, and I needed my last ecclesiastical endorsement. Yep. And do I need to explain that ecclesiastical endorsement?
We've talked about it.
Yeah, okay, good.
So I'm going to get my ecclesiastical endorsement, and I sit down with the bishop, and I let him know that I'm struggling with a couple of things. And
we're having a hard time.
We're having a hard time. And he, at the end of that interview, he says, I'm not comfortable signing your ecclesiastical endorsement.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And maybe we should mention to our non-Mormons, you have to have your church leader or your bishop's approval to be able to attend a church university.
Yeah.
Right.
So if at this moment he were to not sign your ecclesiastical endorsement, you would have to drop out of school and transfer to another school and lose years and thousands of dollars and years off your life, basically.
And this is what goes through my head immediately.
Yeah, that literally what you just explained.
And I kind of sat there stunned. Like, I'm doing everything right. I went on my mission, and I've always tried to be open with my bishops about things that I'm struggling with. And here I am talking to this bishop, opening up to this wonderful man who's
he's a great guy,
working his own job, and he's got his own kids, and he's got his own life. And he says to me, I don't think I can sign your ecclesiastical endorsement.
The reason he gave was?
Well, he felt that some of the things that I was talking to him about made me unworthy to attend BYU. I fundamentally disagreed. Like, I just straight up, my relationship with God at the time, my relationship with Heavenly Father was such that I felt that talking to my bishop was merely a formality.
Would you prefer not to tell us what those things are? You don't have to. I'm not trying to dig unless you're comfortable sharing.
Honestly,
it was masturbation was the problem. Pornography and masturbation.
Which to be honest, like Spencer and I talked very openly about in our marriage, and so the TMI for your listeners, I have no problem with it, especially because reference kind of our previous allusion to it. We were both raised in an ultra conservative church that did not give us a great sexual education. I have a lot of sexual baggage, and ultimately I'm just giving this for context. Years after this happened, I was finally diagnosed. It's something called vaginismus, which makes intercourse really hard, and you can have therapy and you can work through it, and I did, and thank goodness. But I hadn't confronted that yet. So our physical intimacy was difficult. And I felt very comfortable with we can be creative here, because I was physically limited with what I could do. And so it was not an issue in our marriage. I'm the one it should matter to most.
So so I'm just going to flag that. I'm going to throw the Mormon Stories flag. Like, this is not normal. It is not normal in 2010 for a young Mormon couple to have an agreement where either party can masturbate. I'm just going to say, I don't know that I've ever heard that before, right? Usually that's the type of thing that ruins a marriage.
Yeah.
Right.
And you guys, so I want to know, where did you feel like you had the permission? Where did you feel like you had the permission or the authority to read? Was it your parents?
That's a really
Was it some liberal leader?
No, not
Was
parents.
it secular wisdom? Where in the world did you guys get the feeling like you had the authority to give each other that permission?
And I just want to add, it starts with the vaginismus diagnosis, or was that later?
That actually came later.
That came later.
But the diagnosis came later.
But the issue and the problem, that's where it all was
But we
based
didn't
off
know
of.
what the issue was.
Right.
And that was,
What
I
it
think,
what to call it.
Sex was
extra
really
part of
uncomfortable
the
for
hard
me.
thing, right.
And so because I felt like I, for lack of a better word, I don't mean for all this to sound as self-deprecating as it might, because I've dealt with it. But at the time I was like, I am subpar. I can't deliver. So if that's something you need to work into your life, that we could work into our life together, to make sure that this relationship is sexually fulfilling on some level, as a marriage, a healthy marriage should be, then it was honestly like self-permission. I was not really taught much about this by my parents. We didn't really talk to your parents about it. I don't know that it came from an external source, other than for some reason about this particular thing, we felt locked into our own autonomy enough to say that I'm good with it, you're good with it, we're good with each other, and if we got to do the best we can, because I felt so limited and so honestly broken at that point, that it was like, you got to have something.
giving that permission was a much better alternative to splitting up again, because we had been through that initial rocky period. We were kind of in the middle of our therapy around this time, but we had already kind of faced in early days of marriage, like, do we actually want this? And we had committed, and we took that commitment very seriously.
Well, I just want to say how remarkable that is in a positive way.
Thanks.
And it's really powerful and empowering that you would model that for our audience. If they're young couples or even teenagers, that's a really, well, it's an example of two things, of like sexual health. If you believe in Natasha Helfer and professionals in the sexual health space, masturbation actually, by what I hear, is a very healthy thing oftentimes.
Yeah, lots of pros.
But then also just your willingness to listen to yourself and like choose your own intuition in your relationship over dogma. Because that's the sort of thing in an Orthodox Mormon marriage where the wife may say, hey, I'm not really available to you, but tough. You just, that's tough beans for you. And masturbation would never be put on the table. So the husband would either be suffering or just turn into a complete liar.
Shame.
And then they might get caught and that might be a catastrophe. And I've seen many marriages experience all sorts of pain because they weren't able to be as flexible as you were.
And I don't know why, but I'm grateful that it clicked for both of us. I will actually say, I just had this memory of Alan. My first therapist's name was Alan, and it always made me think of that YouTube video, Alan. But he was a, I don't know if he must have been an LDS, because again, this was 2013 when I diagnosis of depression and all that stuff. He helped me reframe. He said, why do you think the story of Nephi is the first story in the Book of Mormon? I was like, what do you mean, Alan? And he talks about Nephi
killing Laban?
Getting the golden plates, killing Laban. So he murders Laban. He then steals from Laban, and then he lies to his family about impersonating Laban. And Alan says to me, why do you think this, what can we learn from the story? And I was like, well, we talked about it. And this is my like professional therapy setting, but he was helping me because I was Mormon and faithful. And he said, sometimes these are like 3 of the big 10 commandments, right? Don't steal, don't murder, whatever. And he says, sometimes our personal revelation comes first.
Man.
And I think that really sunk in for me for the first time, where that's where I said, you know what? Alan, the therapist, is right. If I can't go to church every week because I'm depressed out of my mind, that needs to be okay for me. And like Spencer said, we were both really focused on us and God, and that leading because it had to. And now we had a Book of Mormon precedent for it in the story of Nephi. So it was like, it's okay. We can rely on personal revelation. And I think that also likely fed this decision. So wherever you are, Alan, if you're listening to this, thank you, because that was a great lesson.
Okay.
Big time thanks.
So and all this amazing modeling of relational and individual health. And then and I just want to really make this clear to the audience. Your bishop wants to kick you out of the university
in the final semester of your master's
program. In the final semester of my master's program. So at this point, I didn't have my bachelor's. I was going to get my bachelor's and my master's at the same time. So if I were to not go back to BYU, I would lose everything.
No bachelor's or master's.
And obviously, some credits would transfer, blah, blah, blah. But kind of like Lizzy, I had really front-loaded with my major. And so I wasn't sure. And I'm trying to do the math in real time. How many of my credits would transfer? What would the cost be to go to a different university? And I just start scrambling and sweating, and my heart starts racing. And the bishop looks at me and he says, let's meet again next week. And between today and next week, I'd like you to read the entirety of the Book of Mormon.
In a week.
While he's in school.
And then I'd like you to come back and we'll talk about it.
While he's in marriage therapy.
Like a 50 page book.
Yeah, 532.
Not a great read.
No.
Not like a light,
reading the Old
easy
Testament,
read.
folks.
And so, and of course, I just said, absolutely, Bishop, I will totally do that. And we said a prayer, and meeting was over. And I went home, and I didn't tell Lizzy.
No.
I was so ashamed at the prospect of being kicked out of BYU, losing all those credits, time, all that stuff. I could not face telling Lizzy.
Our plans on hold.
And this is in the midst of marriage counseling. This is in the midst of my final year at BYU. Yep. And that was a very tough week. And I started reading the Book of Mormon when I got home from the bishop's office that day. I cracked it open, started it. I, Nephi, haven't been born of goodly parents. And I kept trying to read throughout that week, but I had some big assignments. I was working on, big master's projects. Our marriage was, we're talking about whether or not we want to stay together or split up. So that was obviously taking some of my time and attention. And the next Sunday came around, and I probably maybe got to like early Alma by the time I went back into the bishop, maybe a third of the way through the Book of Mormon. And I woke up that morning and I thought, what am I going to say to the bishop today? And I think based on kind of that earlier experience with personal revelation and trusting the personal revelation, I thought my relationship with Heavenly Father makes me think that he would not want me to lose out on this opportunity to finish out school. Just that's what I think. And I had to face then that I think this leader might be wrong about what he's doing. Yeah. And so I had to go into this meeting knowing that if I told the truth, that I did not finish the Book of Mormon, that I probably would not get my ecclesiastical endorsement. So I resolved to lie. And I went into the bishop's office and he said, "How was it reading the Book of Mormon?" And I said, "It changed my life. It was the best thing. You are inspired to have challenged me to do that. I can't thank you enough. I have such a testimony of the Book of Mormon. I have such a testimony. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Bishop." And he said, "Wow, great. That's what I want to hear. Here's your ecclesiastical endorsement." And I walked out.
Oh my gosh. By the way, and you're looking very handsome today, by the way, Bishop. That's very inspired.
That jacket, is that a new haircut?
And I didn't tell Lizzy then either.
At least the Lord didn't command you to murder a guy and steal from him and then lie on
Although that's happened. Read Under the Banner of Heaven with the Lafferty brothers. Like that's when that's when the Nephi Laban story gets really dark.
Yeah, exactly.
Or even Julie Rowe, like Julie Rowe or Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
Right.
There's a dark side to
But it definitely was like, we've talked about it since, obviously, and it's like weighing the pros and the cons and knowing, like, the bishop didn't have the full context. Spencer, and also I hate to use this word, but the audacity of Spencer going in to open up to him about what was going on, the vulnerability that took, to then have such a harsh punishment and judgment on the line. Where's the Savior on the ground with the adulteress telling the Pharisees to, cast your own stones or whatever? Where's the loving embrace of the Lord that you hear about? What is this threat? It was a threat.
Yeah.
And that just was, that's icky. That's real icky.
And I, to this day, I love that man.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
He is so wonderful and
good people do bad things.
Great guy. Right. And again, he was working his own job. He's got his own kids. He's got his own life to deal with. And I think he was going through some particularly difficult personal things at the time. So I can't fault him for that.
And I could even see had you said, "Look, I got to Alma, but it's been a busy week. Give me one more week." He probably would have said, "Spencer, I'm just happy to know that you started it and got as far as you did." I mean, he probably
we don't know.
We don't know. I could see that happening, but you weren't willing to take that risk.
I wasn't willing to roll the dice on that. I wasn't willing to do that.
And that's what it comes down to.
And so I didn't tell Lizzy. It was probably 3 or 4 more years.
Just 2 more things. Just really quick, that Mormon bishops have way too much power.
Yeah.
They have the power to ruin lives. And there isn't a standard for what they can and can't do. Right. There's just way too much latitude. And they have, to cancel wedding plans, to send someone home from a mission if it's a mission president, to embarrass them in ways that can scar them for life. Yeah. And in your case, completely destroy your education. It's just way too much power. Yeah. And that's a real thing. But then the other thing is just, it's so twisted when a religion teaches its people to lie.
Right.
Right. And that's the tricky part. The religion doesn't teach you to lie. The religion teaches you to tell the truth.
Yes.
But it does teach you to lie.
But it puts you on the hook.
It trains you to lie.
Trains you. Good. Right? Good. Trains.
It doesn't teach you, but it
trains you.
Encourages you and trains you to lie.
Yeah.
And that was a very, very difficult thing. I could have seen, I have replayed that moment in my head so many times over the years. And honestly, had the bishop simply said, "You know what? Why don't you read the Book of Mormon this week? And let's talk about it next week," without saying, I don't think I'm comfortable signing your ecclesiastical endorsement. he could have gotten it across in a different way. Yeah. And again, I don't want to fault him because he's
working with the tools
part of the system.
It's not about him.
He's not.
We're just talking about the system. That's all.
And my dad is a bishop. Like I have talked to my dad since about his training as a bishop, and they do get nothing. They get a handbook, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And are then expected to deal with very complex things, and it's unfair. It's unfair to these men who are volunteering their time to deal with issues that in some cases are far above their heads and can have such a detrimental impact on people's lives, like you said, John.
Well, I'm sorry that happened.
No,
and I'm glad you found a way out.
And this was another feather in the cap of personal revelation, because I did not feel guilty about this.
Yeah.
I had resolved to go in and to lie to my bishop, and I did not feel like God or
and this is
Jesus
coming from the
would judge
justice
me.
police over here.
And this is
like
this
the
is coming
kid about
from
fairness and justice and right and wrong.
I cared so much about fairness, and so that was a big turning point for me. Of I really think I can trust in myself, and thankfully,
and your personal relationship with
and my
God,
personal relationship
with
Heavenly Father.
Yep.
And thankfully, like Lizzy said, we worked through the marriage counseling, and almost out of stubbornness, I don't know, we just decided, like, you know what, let's make it work. We owe it to each other. Let's just make it.
The road of trying it.
Let's see if we can make it work, and we did. Yeah. And as part of
communication,
I was also doing some of the addiction classes at BYU that they taught.
Oh yeah.
Going to that
because
weekly.
anyone who occasionally looks at porn is probably addicted to it. So let's go to the addiction classes, which that's its own. I mean, I had roommates who would break up with boys because they admitted that they looked at pornography. And just to me, it's just so unnuanced, compassionate. That hard line was always really hard for me. And anyway, so that's again just was something we were always open about because. Yeah. Just didn't want it to be a thing.
So what was the next stop in your faith journey?
So thanks to therapy and medicine, I improved greatly. You graduated, which was like the clouds parted.
Man.
We had a summer in Manhattan. He had an internship. That was super fun. We grew closer together. We moved back to Utah and ultimately didn't take the job in New York. You got a better offer here. And around, we're doing shows at the Hale. We're living, we're working. We got our dogs. And around 2015 is kind of, we had gotten back into better church attendance, kind of that recommitment. I know I had been slacking, but I was in a healthier place and doing better. And around 2015, it hit me that like, man, it has been a long time since I read the Book of Mormon. Honestly, kind of since like 2007 and in college when it was required. Like I mentioned in my interview, like that's when it started to really break down for me. And so it had been a struggle for many, many years. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do, and now this is like 3 years after your Book of Mormon thing, so unrelated. Right. I'm gonna be a good Mormon, and I'm going to read the Book of Mormon through because it's been a while, and I should do that, all these shoulds. So this was just a personal choice, and I start reading in 1 Nephi. And for those who don't know, Nephi's dad, Lehi, has a big vision about the church, about whatever, about the Jerusalem and destruction and how his family can find salvation. Beautiful vision, right? And the vision is there's a rod that leads to a tree. The tree has fruit. It's the fruit of knowledge of life. It's essentially the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you hold to the rod, you hold to the gospel to get to everlasting life. And that there's this fog and these shadows that can, distract you and take you away. And there's this building of jeering people pointing at you who want to distract you and take you away. But hold to the gospel and get to that tree and take of that fruit of eternal life, okay? I'm telling that story for those who might not know it because it will come back into play later. But Lehi has this dream. And then Nephi in the story hears about it from his dad, and he prays to God to have the very same vision. And I got stuck on this in 2015, and I thought to myself, what the heck's the difference between a dream and a vision? Because I have very vivid dreams or had a history of very vivid dreams. And even some like mildly, what do they call them? Premonition-y kind of dreams where it's like, I get deja vu a lot and things happen in my life where I'm like, I swear I had a dream about this. I'm not like predicting that World War III here. I'm just saying like little everyday moments that just feel familiar from like a dream state. Like that's always been my reality. So I latched onto this idea. And believe it or not, the church does not have a lot of resources about visions and dreams and the differences thereof and how you might be able to tell one from another, because I'm sure they don't want anyone getting a big head about, I had a vision. No, I had a vision. So I actually...
Or thinking too long about it.
Or thinking too long about it. So I actually let myself... I mean, there's dream science, there's sleep studies, there's sleep science. I've been diagnosed with 3 sleep disorders. I know how this works. And so I know a little bit about this science of sleep, and there's a little bit of science behind dreams and brain activity in dreams. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can find some answers there. And so I started to let myself explore non-LDS paths to find answers to kind of this question. When does a dream become a vision? And what's really going on there? And this led me into some...
For the record, not like anti-LDS.
No, not at all.
We're talking like just scientific.
Yeah. Like I was reading
what does the scientific community
brain
have to
science
say?
books about dreaming. And that led me into some books about like near-death experiences and just cognition in general. What is consciousness? And that led me into some books I started reading about consciousness. I started reading about spirituality generally, and maybe what some might consider more like new agey kind of spiritual books and subjects. And I was fascinated by this stuff. It really, really resonated with me. And I'm telling Spencer this all the while. And at first he was like, okay, Lizzy, like, yeah, it's funny.
Sounds cute.
I like your hobby. That's fun for you. But as I kept telling him more and more, it was like, oh, interesting. Like, because again, a lot of it was based in science. But then, like I mentioned, it kind of got me into some of this new agey stuff. And so I have some friends who are sort of into some of the new agey things. And I started reading about like auras and energy and vibration. I started reading like Joe Dispenza. He's a guy who does a lot of like meditation work, but he'll hook monks up to like brain machines to like see what the delta, beta, theta waves in the brain happening during meditation. I mean, it's again, lots of research. And like I started getting interested in like crystals, rocks and stones and things. I always collected them as a kid anyway. And now as an adult, I was like, oh, I dug out my old crystal collection. I got a big old chunk of amethyst and rose quartz. But I was really good at putting all that into my Mormon lens. So I was like, well, Joseph used the Urim and Thummim, and later we learned the seer stone. So why can't I have stones? And the brother of Jared in the Book of Mormon takes stones to God to touch with his finger and light up. So clearly stones respond to spiritual energy. And when Jesus is crucified, the rocks rent in anguish, the scriptures say. So clearly stones can respond to energy. There's scriptural precedent for it. So why can't I use that as part of my experience? So, okay, I added that little tool to my tool belt, my religious spiritual tool belt. And then I started, again, in this new agey whatever, I started exploring like tarot cards and oracle cards, which in very traditional LDS is like, that's a little Satan-y, don't go there. But what I started using them for was to facilitate answers to my prayers. That's something I always struggled with. I was that classic LDS person who's like, when you ask God for something, you kind of wait for an answer, your brain starts to go. And I would always question like, oh shoot, is that the spirit telling me that? Or is that just like my brain? Is that just my idea that I want to be the answer, that I want to be true? I could never really tell. So what I might do is like pull a little card out and read the description for it. And I'm not saying tarot cards predict the future. I'm not saying like, I don't know. But what it did get me to do is to think about whatever issue I was thinking about from maybe a new lens. If I pull a card that's about like growth and change, well, how does that apply to the problem I'm thinking about? Or if I'm thinking about struggle, or if I'm whatever I'd pull, and honestly would always be a little bit spookily helpful and accurate, but I used it as a supplement to help me think about my problems in new ways and facilitate, like I said, answers to prayers. I put that in my Mormon tool belt for spirituality.
That was like your version of like cracking the scriptures open and just like choosing a verse and like this, I must be led to this.
Exactly. And then I got into like Reiki. For those who don't know, it's a Japanese like energy healing modality, and it literally translates, the traditional description of it is healing by the laying on of hands, which is how the Mormons describe priesthood power, is laying on of hands. But
do they touch you in Reiki? Because I always thought they don't touch you in Reiki.
So
They
it
just
depends.
put their hands hover over areas.
I think you see that more. I think originally there was more contact. Some people do it with contact. Some people just do a hover in kind of your energy field. But I got certified in Reiki 1 level. There's 3 levels, and now I'm up to level 2. Reiki 3 is like a teacher. And I really liked this because I could heal by the laying on of hands as a lady with Reiki. But I thought, you know what? Hey, it's just another tool. This one's I can use. Spencer can use the priesthood. But I think that they must be related. Maybe we're just talking about the same thing using different words, but okay. So I put that in my little spiritual tool belt. Another one was just this idea, a huge idea in kind of, again, new agey spirituality is like manifestation or the law of attraction, that sort of that karmic, like what you put out comes back to you. And I, once again, was really able to fit this in the Mormon lens. If you think about the people who are like really pro-tithing and people who aren't as much, people who are so invested and faithful about their tithing are always the ones who have the best stories about tithing paying off. Why? Because what you put out, you get back. It's all, to me, that's such a clear intention. And that's why actually to this day, if a faithful Mormon was like, well, but tithing works, how can you deny that? Honestly, I can't. It works because they choose that it works. They make it work. They insist that it works, kind of in an energetic exchange.
The intention behind it is what makes it work.
And also you're paying more attention.
And you're paying more attention. Right, yeah, you're paying more attention to all of the monetary blessings that you're now attributing to the having given of your tithing.
And this is why fasting works.
Exactly.
It is focused energy, focused concentration, and intention on a single thing.
Yeah.
That works.
So whether there's actual...
The Mormons call it fasting and prayer, but that is a universal principle.
Yep. Yeah. And whether there's an actual energetic vibration or it's just a placebo effect, regardless, it's there. And then this is also how I felt about sort of learning about yoga and the chakra energy centers in the body. And I was doing acupuncture too. We were, this is getting a little ahead, but living in California, I started working with a holistic doctor. And the way I thought of that in the Mormon lens was we're taught that we have physical parents, our earthly parents, mom and dad, who give us this body, but our heavenly parents give us our spirit. So we're 50-50. So why wouldn't there be like spiritual pathways in the body the same way there are physical veins and nerves? So once again, I was able to really put it in this Mormon lens. And that really was me sort of starting to crack open, my own personal relationship with spirituality at large, B, for the first time noticing and getting frustrated with the ceiling and gatekeeping in the LDS church, where because I was a woman, I could only get so far spiritually. I could only get so close to God, and without holding certain callings as a woman, or even Spencer as a man, being my priesthood holding husband, we would have somehow less access to God unless we had higher and higher callings or something. Like that started to become clear to me, and it was like, I don't like that. And then it was also this understanding of reading about, yogic traditions, Buddhist traditions, Hindu traditions, lots of common themes. And like, wait a minute, I think we're all just talking about the same thing and using different words for it. And that, like priesthood power or Reiki power or,
driven home by our Islam in the gospel class at BYU.
And our Judaism in the gospel
class that we both took together, just kind of for fun.
And it was like,
and we went,
wow, there's a lot of overlapping themes here.
Yeah, we are speaking the same language.
And meanwhile, we're both doing the church thing, teaching young, the boys in primary, I was teaching young, I loved young women. We went to girls camp. I loved teaching the young women.
And I'll just say, this is Lizzie's journey.
Yeah.
Through all of this, I'm just going through life, working my job.
Yeah, he was listening. He was supportive.
Yeah, I was hearing
Found a lot of it
things,
interesting.
She was leading the charge.
Yeah.
Can I just say I'm loving, again, another part of this conversation. This is a really relevant Mormon topic.
Yeah.
So I'll just, for those who don't know anything about Mormonism, things like Reiki, things like crystal use as kind of a...
Yeah, it's gotten more and more popular over the last couple of years.
Muscle testing, and essential oils. And I'm gonna use a term that I am not meaning in a pejorative way, but it's stuff that, like, from my background is described as woo.
Oh yeah. Oh, I call myself woo woo all the time.
So it's like super, like from a secular standpoint,
a little woo woo.
It's viewed as a little bit superstitious.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Imbuing in objects power that they surely likely don't have. Probably misusing, instead of a therapist,
right?
You go to a Reiki person. Instead of, taking your kid to the doctor, you use some essential oils. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to say it's good or bad.
Right.
I'm trying to say two things at least. One is it's very common in Utah Mormonism and probably California and Idaho and Arizona Mormonism.
And my theory for that is exactly why I got into it, which is it gives the woman something to do for the first time. That like the man always has a priesthood power, the man always can heal, but the woman, well, now she has oils and she has crystals and she could do energy stuff. And like,
I love that.
There's this is why the women are doing it, because it's something to latch on to.
Yeah. Well, that's a really important part is it's empowering the women.
Yes.
And then that's more important than the point I was about to make. But the other point I was going to make is you just helped me realize all that stuff is very scripturally Mormon.
Oh, yes.
So like in Mormon history, women would use the laying on of hands to heal. And that was taken away in the early 20th century by Mormon general authorities, fearing that women would get too powerful and that men would become disincentivized to become, quote, leaders in their home. Or freaking stones, like Joseph Smith's putting a stone in a hat to see Revelation, to translate the Book of Mormon.
God is speaking to Joseph Smith through a stone. That is the transaction.
And we already, we had that couple on that talked about, Joseph's use of a Jupiter talisman that he would wear around. Like Joseph Smith believed in the power of objects, that they had power. So why wouldn't Mormons believe that crystals or stones had power? Or even the oil thing. You made me think of this. Like
consecrated oil.
Mormons heal through consecrated oil. So why wouldn't essential oils potentially be used for imbuing power? Like not to mention, again, like you said, the manifesting is totally in Mormonism. It's we're taught the tithing and fire insurance. It's like the Lord is bound when you do what he says. You do what's righteous. The Lord, it's prosperity gospel stuff. You do what God says, he's going to bless you. Well, how is that different from the law of attraction, from the secret, and from all that?
Colloquially, within Mormonism, if, say, a ward member gets sick, the whole ward will fast together for that ward member. 300 people in a neighborhood or in a congregation will forego food for a full 24 hours on behalf of that person. So we also are learning subconsciously that it's more powerful when we set an intention together, that when we do it together, it somehow amplifies the energy of our prayer to God. Like, we don't teach it like I just said it, but that is the lesson we're absorbing, that, well, it's not just enough if I fast for brother so-and-so who's on his deathbed. It's more powerful if we all do it together and up that intention, up that vibration, so that it's built in. It's built into Mormonism.
Yeah, plus this whole talk about energy, like energy healing, it's rooted in this idea of a spirit, of a spiritual world. And there's a level at which it's all fine. Like you said it, even if it's just placebo effect is real and can make a difference. So I'm not like a hater on Woo, like in a total hardcore sense. And if you couple these kind of potentially superstitious beliefs and practices with a distrust and a distaste for science and critical thinking,
that's when it gets bad. It
can lead to Julie Rowe, Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow, and all of a sudden kids are dead, or a pregnant woman is stabbed in the stomach, the Lafferty brothers. You combine with all that the teaching you very started this episode with, that God can speak to people individually and even have them do things like lying, stealing, and murder. If the right voice comes into their head, you mix all that up into a Mormon stew and you put it in Rexburg, and some really dark, things can happen. Happen. Yeah.
Let me take it back from even that dark of place, because I don't even want to go to that extreme. I want to talk about just the normal everyday way that plays out, because that is how my mother, who I love so much, is.
That's Carah.
We had the episode, last week about some reasons why people are so right-wing that are leaving the church. And there's a lot of factions of people who are into energy healing. And there's a certain subset of a subset that Lizzy just described that goes throughout, the Mormon corridors. And my family's in one of those. And what that actually manifests as is my mom doing her own version of Reiki, her own version of massage therapy, talking to demons in people's, and clearing out the energy and thinking that she's talking to demons in her head. And me growing up thinking, wow, like that's intense. That's so cool. 100% believing that's what my mom is doing. But what that does to a person like my mom's brain makes them more double down that they have the Spirit. They have the right, like I am even more powerful than the prophet is probably, you know, that they know better. And then when your child leaves the church, you had an experience talking to demons. Of course, the person who left the church, they don't know what they're talking about because their spiritual commitment is so, it's so multi-diverse. Like it's not just your standard Mormonism. Like people in this certain faction of Mormonism that are into these different things, they're really hardcore in belief. And so I can just say from my personal perspective, it leads to a lot of divisiveness and alienation from people who don't believe the same things. There's not a lot of nuance in people's brains is how I would put it.
And go ahead.
And I was just going to say, to me, I said the flip side of that coin is, because like you said, when you take that stuff and you combine it with a distrust of science, you know, it can go this dark way. Flip side of the coin is me and Spence, where when you can take this stuff and combine it with a total trust of science, then you have like healthy and wholehearted people who are curious and open to new things. I love crystals and rocks because they're pretty. That's the first reason I like them. I've always been interested in fossils and mountains, and I love geology. That's my first. And second of all, if me having a certain pink stone out on my desks, and I have attributed this stone to me represents my heart, and that this reminds me to love more openly. And every time I glimpse it, I think, oh yeah, open-heartedness. That's all I need it to be. Whether it actually is that, and like
doesn't matter.
With energy of love and compassion. Doesn't matter. To me, and that's what I think, and this is where our interpretations can get so skewed, and like the nuance is so important, because when I say like, oh yeah, I love crystals, it's because I like the rocks, I like their geology, I like how pretty they are, and I like the meaning I put into them. And that's as far as it goes. If they really have energy and power, great.
Sure.
That'll be a nice surprise.
Bonus.
Yeah,
but I like it for what I use it for. Same thing with like the tarot cards. I'm not looking at that to predict my future. I'm looking at that to help me reframe a certain thing, you know, and it's when you put all of your eggs in one basket in a staunch, immovable, and I hate to put it in this term, but like completely ego frozen way that I am what I believe, and what I believe is this, and this is right. And if it is wrong, then I am wrong. And I, you know, like that domino effect, that's when it gets toxic.
Yeah.
Versus if somebody could come in and say, actually, there's no science behind essential oils, then I can go, oh, well, at least they smell nice.
Yeah.
You know, you got to be able to be open. And I think that's the key. It's
perfectly said.
You know, I guess
I love you so much.
Ultimately could go into scrupulosity about whatever it is. But
this is a really important thing.
Yeah.
And then, Carah, you lived it.
Yeah.
I do want to say one thing, but I
was just going to say,
I don't want to move on.
But then you had this little cherry on top that once again, just like Spencer and you kind of suffered on your missions, cutting off from your family without any explanation. It's fine now for missionaries to talk to their families. Similarly, recently, they slipped into the old little handbook without any announcement or fanfare that like, this energy work stuff is no good.
Okay. And I'm glad they did that. And let me just tell you why. In addition to, you know, the misuse of these objects when proper medical attention or therapy, or
when it goes bad, it goes real bad.
Other types of things should be in order. Treating cancer with essential oils, for example, or trying to like, I've literally heard about people in Cache Valley. This isn't 30 years ago or medieval times or like 100 years ago. This year in Cache Valley, parents, instead of getting braces for their kids, taking them to do foot zoning to see if they can straighten their kids' teeth. Like just really weird things. Aside from all that, there's the potential abuse of power. So like we all know when a cult leader of a big church can like abuse a bunch of people. But these practitioners of muscle testing, of Reiki, of essential oils, it can be a gateway into giving someone power over your life. I have a friend who lived up north who is struggling in his faith, super depressed. I probably told the story on Mormon Stories before. Super depressed. He hears, go to the muscle memory person or go to the foot zoner. They'll be able to help you. He's depressed, suicidal, in a marriage that's struggling, way too many kids, goes to like the foot zoner. She's like foot zoning his feet. And she's like, you're supposed to have more children.
No.
And he's like almost not sure he wants to live anymore. But like, that's just one example. And if you actually dig into the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell stuff, it was just Reiki.
Yeah.
It was just energy work.
Sure.
But those people that take on the mantle of being able to communicate with the divine or sense energies,
Right.
what they end up doing is claiming to know things about your life that somehow you don't get to know, but they can tell you what you should be doing. And it can lead to sexual abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse. It becomes a mini cult.
Totally. And I think like for me, that's the difference where like I've been through the Reiki training. I'm technically certified and I only really do it for friends and family. I don't ever ask anyone to pay me for it because that, again, to me, that's where it starts to get weird.
Yeah.
And I remain very skeptical of it. And it's funny, Spencer just asked me the other day, he's like, we should do some Reiki. Cause like, he's just feeling some, people, because again, even colloquial, there's, precedent for energy work. Like even those phrases of like, oh, she just really brought the room down. Like that's because
Somebody lights up a room.
Somebody lights up a room, or I just got this really sinking feeling. Like people carry an energy with them. Energy is real. There's ways you can
We
measure.
are literally made of atoms that are spinning with electrons.
And
That's
there's this
what
really
we're made
cool
of.
project, the Global Consciousness Project. There's these machines all around the world that just put out random ones and zeros. That's literally all they do all the time. But they have they sync up on occasion with no explanation. They are random number generators. They should not be syncing. But they found patterns of syncing when Princess Diana died. They found patterns of syncing around the 9/11 time.
I would want to verify this, but I
mean, you could go read about it. Like there's studies done. It's called the Global Consciousness Project, and all the what their findings are there. But like people are trying to do research around these kind of phenomenon that we have general.
There's mystery. There's mystery.
Exactly.
All of us would agree with that.
Though, is like you said, like there's one thing to learn about this, and for me to say, like, listen, if there's a greater energy, healing energy out there, that by me hovering my hands over you at these certain points and breathing calmly and both of us just being in a calm, nice space and spending some time with each other, if that helps you feel more even, great. Like if that helps you calm your mind and your heart, great. I don't attribute that to kind of myself at all. Theoretically, if I do the motions, it all works for itself. You know what I mean? But when people start to attribute that with a sense of something or a sense of power or a sense of identity that, oh, it is about me, like then A, you've lost the point, and B, that's where it gets totally toxic.
Well, I love that we covered this because it is a real Mormon thing.
It is a real Mormon thing. And it's real, A, the people who do it and take it into interesting places, and two, the complete dismissal of it, where it's like, why is my laying on of hands any different than your laying on of hands? You know what I mean? Where it's like you said, Joseph Smith talked to God through a stone. Why are my stones like? I don't know.
And it comes back to the whole thing about personal revelation. And the church does teach about personal revelation. If personal revelation is a thing, then there's no reason that you couldn't talk to God through a rock.
Attention. It's attention.
And I think that
it's teeter-totter.
It was interesting to watch Lizzy kind of go on this journey, because as she was adding these tools to her tool belt, it was all within the context of Mormonism and also in the context of personal revelation. So she wasn't looking to other Reiki practitioners for she wasn't looking to them as
my new prophets.
Like
nothing
external
like
authority. It was about internal versus external.
She was just gathering as many resources and as much information as she could from anywhere, and was making sense of that for herself.
Yeah.
No, and I love that in your case, it evolved into personal, critical thought, critical thinking.
Exactly.
And then it ended up in personal empowerment.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it when that's where the story goes.
Totally. Because like I said, I'm reading about kind of the consciousness and reading about near-death experiences, which led me to reading about yoga and reading about Buddhism, which then I thought, well, why don't I go straight to the source? So during this time, and I would say this is really going from 2015 into like even 2019-ish.
Yeah.
We moved to California in 2017, and we'll get there. But all of this to say, during this time, I read a lot of, some all of, but some little bits of, but I have read the Quran, the Talmud, Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, Tao Te Ching, teachings of Confucius, Black Elk Speaks, just all of these kind of spiritual books, what other religions consider to be scripture, and starting to go straight to the source for some of these other sources of belief. and realizing really for the first time that, oh, we are all using different words to kind of explain the same kinds of stuff. And it was the first time I allowed myself to see, we always talk about other religions have pieces of the puzzle. We just have the full puzzle. And
half the piano. They have half the piano.
Yeah, half the piano keys.
Piano.
And I saw just how many piano keys were the same and just how many other religions actually do have. And in some cases, like maybe even a little more or different versions of that were interesting or, it's easy to say, oh yeah, there's some truth there and let it be. But to actually dig into what truth is there and what commonalities we do have, it was like, why are we so convinced we're the only ones here? Because there's just a lot of overlap, and that was really interesting to me. So
yeah, I love that. I always like to think of like Mormonism kind of, you can start with an orthodoxy of this is where the authority is. And the more you expose yourself to other ways of thinking, whether that's through travel or just reading and meeting people, like it just shaves away at that orthodoxy of like,
Totally.
I thought we had most of the authority and other people had good things, but it's like, oh, I can really learn something from somebody else. Or like, maybe I could really take a back seat and let other people,
right.
that have spent thousands of years in these different other traditions.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier with missions of like, maybe we should shut up a little bit more and like sit down and listen.
Right. Well, and then especially because like I mentioned, I had been on some of these tours with the BYU ensembles where I did get to go to Buddhist temples and I did get to see other things in action. And that was interesting to me at that time. So now learning more about it was like, oh, I was feeling quote unquote the spirit there. These are very spiritual places. Or, and this actually leads really well into moving to California. So right before, I'll stay on this train of thought. So I'll let you tell the story moving to California, but I remember it's literally what you just said. Somebody, a number of people would come up to us when we decided to move to California and say like, now don't let this make you leave the church.
So my mom,
now don't move away and leave the church. I just feel like I have so many friends who move away and they leave the church. And I remember being like, oh, please, we're fine. We're never, literally, I mean, I truly felt that's never going to be, I felt like we had finally found our groove with church. We were loving our callings. I was really making my own way with my spirituality and really never felt like it was ever going to be a problem. But yeah, we decided to move in 2017. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell a little bit about what that looked like?
Yeah. 2017 was interesting. We had started a business we were both working full-time on the business we had started. And we were spending all day, every day together. And we were doing shows at the Hale Theaters and
it's a good life.
Enduring to the end. That was just kind of what it was. And we thought there's got to be more. There's more. There's more.
2013,
and
2014.
We are both big Disney fans. And so we, while still living in Utah, got Disneyland annual passes and we would take the flight from Provo to LAX.
On like a Thursday night.
On a Thursday night and just take like a short little weekender in Disneyland.
Yeah, home Sunday morning.
And it was super fun. We had a really great time doing that. And we thought, you know what, let's change things up a bit. And if we were to move,
we felt stagnant.
If we were to move anywhere, where would we move? And the place that we knew best was Anaheim, California, because of Disneyland. So we thought, well, let's do that because it checked a few boxes. Lizzy, as an actor, really wanted to start pursuing improv and comedy training. And LA is a great place to do that at the Groundlings. And so we thought, yeah, this feels like a good step in the right direction. So we picked up, we moved to Anaheim. And
wait, you wanted to break into comedy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
was that Carah's influence at all? Or
I mean, Lizzy and I since 8th grade were like pretty good improv actors, but
yeah, I wanted less stand-up comedy and more of like the improv character-based acting,
SNL
like the Will
like
Ferrell,
Second City,
Kristen
stuff.
Wiig, exactly, that kind of stuff.
Wow, you wanted to be an SNL star. That's kind of ambitious. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Can you see why like me and Lizzy immediately became friends?
I can't see it. I can't see it. I can't
gonna see our names and lights. Lights, I tell you.
But yeah, we felt. We wanted a change. We felt like shaking it up, and it was hard to make that shift because we didn't have a job to take us there, and we didn't really feel like we had been prompted necessarily to move. We just felt like it would be. Yeah, we just felt like it would be good for us. And so we did. And we moved down on a Saturday. Sunday, we were at church.
Yeah, that was me. I was like, if we don't go right away, then we're not going.
Yeah.
So I was like, I found our ward. I made it happen. We went the next day we moved in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was a fine ward. It was great. And we ended up, that was a hard summer because we were traveling back and forth to Utah. We had some family weddings. We had some family vacations and things. And we came back to California after being gone for about a month. And we showed up and I sat down in priesthood, opening exercises to play the piano. And someone came over and was like, "What are you doing?" I'm playing the piano. Like, this is my calling. He goes, "Well, you're not in this ward." I was like,
"What?
Excuse me?" He said, "Oh, you've been gone. The ward split while you were gone. You now are in this different ward in this totally different building." And that was weird.
Jarring.
And so we started going to this new ward, and it was weird. It was weird. It was a weird ward.
It was a new ward.
It was a new ward
combined of three pieces of three other wards.
Yeah,
nobody knew each other.
Yeah,
So was this impactful to your testimony?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how so?
And I'll
Because
talk about why.
Again, we jumped right in. We went to church the first day we were in California. We had the missionaries over for dinner. They came over for Christmas Eve that year. We wanted to do the good, not living in Utah Mormon thing. Mm-hmm. And kind of couldn't. We were trying, and our ward wouldn't let us. This new ward was so discombobulated. The bishop was an interesting guy. He met with us like the first week we found our way to that ward. And we told him all about what we do and how we were self-employed for many years and worked together. And he gave us kind of this lecture about how hard it can be to work together. And, you still got to, husbands and wives can and it was just like, none of what he said applied. And it was like, did you even just listen to it? It just felt like this weird, I don't even know. He gave advice because he could, or maybe felt he should.
It felt like another, kind of like my bishop in Orem in the ecclesiastical endorsement.
Yeah.
I think you're very well intentioned here, but I don't trust that what's coming out of your mouth is for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next week, he was like, "Oh, nice to meet you. Let's get a meeting on the books." And it was like, we spent an hour with you last week. And I mean, and that's just, it was an odd interaction. I don't blame him. He was the bishop of this brand new ward, which we ultimately actually found out was because membership was dwindling. So they kind of rearranged the stakes in the wards to make the wards a little bigger overall. I think they did away with one entire ward. And it just was like, a car missing a wheel. You know what I mean? This ward could not get going. And we tried, we did our callings, and it just was so different from this super happy, welcoming, in a groove ward that we had been in for the last 6-7 years in Utah, mm-hmm. that just worked and everybody knew it was up. And it was just a struggle. And we didn't feel like anybody cared. And we had a couple friends in that ward who felt the same way. They were experiencing very similar mm-hmm. things. And meanwhile, I felt spiritually fulfilled kind of on my own with my own reading and meditation and what, all that I was doing.
And it was against this backdrop.
Go for it.
Oh, we were going to signal.
It was against this backdrop that a friend of ours came to visit us in California and came out to us as gay. And he seemed very nervous to tell us. And I absolutely understand why. But
we also have a theater background this. Of all the people it was going to phase, we were like, okay.
Yeah, we know lots of people who are gay and love lots of people who are gay. But for the first time, we sat down with someone and asked them about their experience growing up in the church, gay.
Yeah, he's the closest person we've had.
And that was really eye-opening. For the first time, we realized that as we talked about our experiences being really, really great growing up in the church and how wonderful it was and how I wouldn't change a thing about my experience in the church, that is not the case for everybody else. And that really hit me for the first time that, wow, someone may have had an actually hurtful and harmful and damaging experience in the church growing up. Mm-hmm. And the more I would ask him specific questions about, okay, so what was it like for you to pass the sacrament? What was it like for you to bless the sacrament? And what was it like for you to go on a mission?
Yeah.
Was all
dating
these
girls at BYU
because
he's trying to do the right thing and fit in the mold.
And it for some reason, it finally struck me, why would I want to sit in church when one of my best friends would not feel comfortable sitting next to me in church. Why would I spend my time
There's a
going
problem
there?
with that.
There is a problem there. He is one of my best friends. I love him, and he would not be comfortable in church. Why would I go? And that, for me, was probably the final kick I needed to send me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, to start reading into why. Like this, I mentioned in my interview this idea of like, well, if you don't like the onions on the pizza, just take them off. And like, it's going to change the flavor of everything a little bit, but at least you're not eating like the onion, like the strong onions. And like for the first time, we realized it was a very nice thing that we were able to take those onions off the pizza. Not everybody gets to do that. And for the first time, we ate every bite of that onion pizza, and it was hard. And it was like, we can no longer just sort of like nuance spaghetti noodle our way around this very big issue.
We had nuanced our way around the 2015 policy.
Yeah, that came and it was like, well,
we did a really great job of fitting that into the Mormon lens and trying to make that work in our heads. But this, for the first time, really just kind of, it was a big enough shake. It shook enough things loose that I had to go picking things up. And as I was picking up these pieces that had been shaken loose, I looked at them for the first time and I kind of went, okay, well, what is the church's policy on LGBTQ? What is the church's policy now? What has it been? What other policies have there been? And when have those policies changed? So you start to look at blacks in the priesthood. You start to look at polygamy. You start to look at all these other policy issues.
What John mentioned, women used to be able to give blessings, and now they can't anymore.
Kind of the early women using the priesthood kind of thing.
Word of wisdom used to be optional, and now you have to have it to get into the temple.
Yeah, now it's part of the temple. Even tithing, like so many policies have come and gone in the church.
2% in temporary to 10% in permanent.
And it just sent me down that hole of, I think the church, if my bishop could be wrong about my ecclesiastical endorsement at BYU, is it possible that maybe the church leaders today could be wrong about the LGBTQ stuff? And it's that thought. And if you can wrap your head around that, just even in a hypothetical, could they be wrong about something? And if you ultimately come to the conclusion that yes, they could be wrong, it starts to call into question everything else.
And not only the hypothetical of yes, they could be, but the fact that the church has said yes, they have been. That Brigham Young was a man of his time, but by today's standards, he's wrong. That's what the church is saying, is that it was not okay to be racist, and we made it like they haven't ever said it, but that's what they're saying, is that prophets have gotten it wrong in the past. So if there's even a very loose and general nod of admission towards that, by a policy changing is not enough in my mind towards that reality that someone's personal opinion may have really carved out a terrible portion of the church's history here, then who's to say that this 2015 policy, which then suddenly was reversed with no explanation, who's to say that's not just a bad opinion?
Just a modern version of that.
Yeah.
And you guys literally just explained why one of the most heinous things in modern Mormonism was ever said, which is down a joke saying, "We do not seek nor offer apologies." You just explained the reason why. Because as soon as they say we goofed up, their prophetic authority erodes. Right. And so they can't ever say we got it wrong in the past or we made a mistake in the past, because immediately all the smart thinking members are going to say, well, then how do we know you've got it right now?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Calls it into question. And that's a scary, scary
And
thought.
that's a real scary thought.
To them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Another church teaching that rang is, I think there's a Hinckley quote. I think there's a number of quotes of church leaders who say either it's all true or it's all not true.
Hinckley said it's either everything it claims to be, meaning the Book of Mormon, or the greatest fraud that's ever been perpetrated on mankind.
Right.
I'm like, really? Is that the choice?
Man said that.
Throwing down the gauntlet.
And he was my childhood prophet, Hinckley.
Yeah.
I loved Hinckley.
Yeah.
He was everyone's grandpa.
course.
Like everyone loved Hinckley.
So if you allow a crack in the foundation, then by their own teachings, the entire foundation is faulty.
That's right. So they can't admit it.
So I want to get into more about, those cracks and like
Yeah.
those shelf items and the reasons and things, but I don't want to neglect something that I think is really fascinating. So you just mentioned, like, for your gay friend, there's certain things that he wasn't able to take off of the pizza. That was the gospel to them. And a lot of times, especially women in the church, we think that, like the men have their gender roles, we have our gender roles, our sexuality, theirs, and you don't notice things until you kind of are shocked into it. And where I'm going with this is I remember you doing that fitness competition.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about what your testimony was when you did when you did this fitness competition, because I think it's not until you're standing on stage, maybe in your underwear, that you recognize maybe some of those teachings. Those were kind of poisonous onions that you couldn't have taken off.
You are totally right. Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting like subplot of what's going on here. So right before we moved to California, so just to back up, there was an interesting part of why I did this fitness competition. When we got married, we didn't want kids for 5 years. Okay. So when we hit 2015, as I mentioned, I was feeling healthier. I was dealing with the depression, all this stuff. It was also the 5-year mark of us being married. And so we said, well, here we are. Should we have kids? And just for listeners, Spencer and I still don't have kids yet. We've been married 12 years now. That's not something we've chosen yet. And, but at that 5-year mark, I had been out of school for a few years. I was working 40 hours a week, and I had the extra weight gain to show for it, and the lack of walking around campus and built-in exercise, that you get just being a student. I was not in a healthy place, and I actually had this severe guilt that like, well, if we're gonna have kids, I don't want to host a baby in like such an unhealthy body. Like, way to like not have this kid's best interest at heart, like from day one. So I thought, well, I better get my act together physically so that I can like be in a better physical state to like carry a child. I was just a little apathetic and fairly overweight at that time. And so I started working with a trainer, just nutrition and exercise, and really started enjoying it and doing it more. And he always kind of joked, you have great proportions. You should go do a fitness competition. I was like, yeah, right. Cause I was raised in, I wouldn't say hyper modest, but definitely on the more modest end. Like I would never dream of wearing a bikini to the pool. I was a one-piece gal. Like I was always very aware of my cleavage and making sure that was covered up, like t-shirts all day, every day, no tanks for me. And so that was always just like, haha, I'm not going to do that. And then one day, I don't know what clicked, but I sort of started to entertain it. Like, why not? Because of band, I never got to do athletics. I never got to do sports, and I never really pushed myself physically. And I was really enjoying weightlifting. And I was like, well, why not? And so I sort of started training for that end of 2016. And I competed in April of 2017. And I mean, I was down to probably like 16% body fat. I was ripped. I did a MPC bodybuilding bikini division fitness competition. High heels, glittery bikini, the whole 9 yards.
Tan. Super tan.
Super tan.
I looked like Malibu Barbie.
Was that spray tan or real tan?
Oh, spray tan. Layers and layers and layers. And you buy black sheets and cover up like your sheets because it will rub off. Anyway, so like I learned a lot. Lots of smoke and mirrors, and there's a lot of reasons people do why they do and how they do. It's fascinating to just immerse myself in this really interesting world. It's a really hard thing for my parents to wrap their head around. My mom, she was so nervous. She's like, are people going to be leering at you from the audience? I was like, Mom, the audience is made up of like families and kids and trainers. That's it. Like nobody's going to pay $30 admission fee to like leer.
Except for me.
Yeah, except for guys. Yeah. But like, and so I just really want to push myself, see what I could do physically. I placed 7th in my division. It was, good enough for me. I felt really good, and I was looking really good, and I was physically capable, like in strong, like really strong for the first time in my life. And I was really proud of my success, and I didn't feel like I could talk about it. Like I felt like it was vain. That because it had to do with my physical appearance ultimately, but that's not why I was doing it. I wanted to see what I could do physically. I wanted to push myself mentally and see how strong I could get just as an experiment. It wasn't about like looking hot. That was a nice byproduct, but I didn't feel like I never posted photos until like 2 years later. And even then it was part of a carousel. I never posted photos of myself because I also didn't want like my young women to see it if they scroll. There was a lot of like weird baggage and shame about like what I could say and how I would talk about it. And I would always give it like a qualifier, like Like, I know this is kind of weird, but I'm doing this fitness competition, and, you know, it's not about looking hot, it's about getting strong. Like, I anticipated the raised eyebrows before they even would come. And
when people would ask about your actual competition day, you would say, no, you don't have to come.
Yeah, I told my parents straight up to not come. And they didn't.
You don't have to come.
Yeah, you don't have to come.
Just to give people like an immediate out.
Yeah, because I didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable. And it just, for the first time in my life, hyper exposed my body shame. And how I felt that my body, just for existing, was problematic. That it would make people feel things, that it would make people think things. If I wasn't careful to manage their potential interpretation of the situation and their thoughts. And that for the first time really clicked. And also, like, I'm really proud of my success here. I'm lifting really heavy weights. I'm doing really well, and I don't feel like I could talk about it when I, quote unquote, lift weights with my brain. If I get into college, if I do really well, if I take a test, if I'm successful in jazz band, I can talk about it all I want.
Or lifting spiritual weights, reading the scriptures, doing all that kind of stuff.
Now that it's physical weight, that's not okay. I can't talk about my body. Like, what? That's interesting. That really highlighted that for the first time. And then getting back into quote unquote normal life exposed a bunch of like food sensitivities because I'd been eating so well that when I started putting trash back into my body did not like that. I had to address that. And that's when we had moved to California. It was right after that competition. And I started working with this holistic doctor who got me into more herbal medicines to help fix my gut health, who got me into acupuncture, who for the first time got me on CBD supplements. I took them like a multivitamin. This is a compound of cannabis. And it's legal in California. And also, I swapped out Ambien for THC compounds of cannabis. That's what gives you that relaxed high feeling. And in a state where it was legal and being prescribed by my doctor and realizing, wait a minute, this is a plant ostensibly that God gave us on this planet Earth to help us. And I don't have to put chemicals in my body to sleep, chemicals that exacerbate Alzheimer's and dementia, both of which run in my family. Oh, I can forego that for a natural remedy that helps calm my mind and body to be able to sleep comfortably. That's interesting. So, Carah, like you, I'm glad you brought it up because this is also, I getting up to moving to California was kind of the spiritual journey. The year before we moved and into being in California was really a physical journey for me where I did this fitness competition. I'm facing my body shame. I'm healing my body with more natural remedies while also continuing. I mean, I'm regularly see therapists, so whatever. And I also decided, like, a new life, new me, who dis, I'm finally going to address some of these sexual issues that we mentioned earlier in this episode. So I started working with a sex therapist in California for the first time. And that
You're just getting all healthy.
Yeah, like I said, it's like
none of it is tied to Mormonism.
Right?
Exactly.
It's almost in spite of Mormonism.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking, why haven't they had kids yet? This is a real problem.
Right.
And you're actually getting healthy before
Exactly. I wanted to be a healthy person before and it's interesting. This is all in tandem of like all my friends, all my old roommates from BYU having kids and feeling miserable about themselves and not having, their couple, like their relationship has struggled.
You're looking at Carah and going, man, that didn't work out well.
Yeah, you and those kids.
So I better not have kids.
One thing
I'm kidding. I love you.
But meanwhile, Spence and I have had this opportunity to do, marriage therapy, and I'm getting my body healthy and I'm getting my mind healthy. And we're dealing with the sexual dysfunction issues that I had that, oh my heck, had a diagnosis that it's not just me being a broken person. Like that was a revelation. And one thing that my therapist had me do, this is a licensed medical professional. She suggested, why don't occasionally you not wear your Mormon garments because it was so negative to my body image. And because a doctor prescribed it, I thought, all right, I will give it a try. Because the temple questions, it's like, is it most of the time? Or, it's like morning and night, but there are sometimes exceptions. And I would say that my mental health is an exception. So I would take them off occasionally on days that were like mentally hard with the body stuff going on, body image issues. And
what was the idea? What was the theory behind that?
The theory is, so for those who might not know,
account.
The Mormon garments is like underwear that men and women wear. It's like basically to the knee shorts and
like
just an undershirt.
Shorts, like biker shorts.
Yeah, and it's just the elastic hits at a funny place at the waist. It's an undershirt and shorts, and it's just not flattering. It's an extra layer under every piece of clothing you wear. It's thick. It bunches. It it is just not flattering to look at, and it doesn't make you feel good to wear. At least that's been my experience. I know some people love their garments. I'm glad they have peace with them. But for me, it was a struggle. And as we're trying to redefine and expand our sexual relationship for the first time in a meaningful way, where I'm actually facing the physical issues, the mental hurdles, taking those off was freeing. And again, this is in tandem with, this is all related to, I actually like my body for the first time. My weight isn't yo-yoing like crazy, like it pretty much had my whole life. Like I actually feel physically comfortable with myself. And that was a revelation. And it was to realize that wearing the garments was like detrimental. And you were able to view me a little different. Like I was spicy wearing something that I felt good about. It wasn't even that it wasn't the church underwear. It was just the way I felt in it. And could,
it was your confidence.
My confidence that where I could.
Absolutely your confidence.
It just was an interesting little kick open of a door of like, what am I doing this for? What is this all
So the therapist was thinking if you didn't wear your garments, what would happen?
That I would feel confident.
More confident
that I would
in your
feel
body.
more confident in my body. That I would be able to feel more confident sexually with my partner. That I would be able to not feel restricted and restrained and frumpy. And she was right. And
so that worked out?
Yeah, that was a really helpful tool. And I still
one of many
one
tools.
of many. There's many really great books, really great. There's this book, Women, Food, and God. There's a book, Come As You Are. Really great resources. She was really, really great therapist. Thank you, Liz. And Spencer and I were able to actually like work on, and I would even say fix a lot of like the sexual intimacy issues that we sort of had up to that point. So we were in a groove in a way that we hadn't been before, which was really refreshing.
And this is 7 years into our marriage.
7 years of shame that I finally faced in California. And
you were doing, and are you going to go into the vaginismus much?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's
Okay,
what it was.
yeah.
I mentioned that earlier, but that it's just a physical condition where it makes intercourse.
But
really
she was
terrible.
doing physical therapy to help with this issue.
Yeah, it is a physical. It has to do with the muscles of your pelvic floor being wackadoodle, and but I dealt with it. I faced it. I fixed it, and I did both the physical therapy and the mental therapy to overcome the shame at the same time. I would highly recommend both. And any women who find intercourse to be comparable to the burning fiery gates of hell, please go see a physical therapist for vaginismus and deal with it. You can. Life gets better. I'm looking at you, whoever you are. Just go. Just deal with it because it is worth it. So there's my little testimony of that.
Can I just say, I've been on this kick of exploring this term anti-Mormon. In other words, something that is completely not Mormon or even opposed to the core teachings of the church.
Right.
And your story, this is just now hitting me. Your story is super anti-Mormon in the sense that you waited many years to get married. No, sorry. You waited many years to have kids.
Yeah, to have kids.
Yeah.
And I know, Carah, you were an exception to that. But I mean, generally speaking, we're supposed to have kids within the first year.
Right away.
And then you took time to self-develop in ways that weren't pray and read the scriptures.
Right.
You're like going to professionals, going to dietitians or exercise people or therapists, improving your marriage, not like bury yourself in your calling and commit yourself to the church, have as many kids as possible, and then somehow miraculously, through doing nothing that actually contributes positively to your mental health, you're going to somehow get healthy, physically and mentally healthy.
Right.
You're actually doing what the Mormon church would call selfish.
That's true.
Or self-centered.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're getting personally healthy before you start having a gaggle of children.
Right.
And it's literally one of the most anti-Mormon things I've ever heard on Mormon Stories.
Interesting.
Especially for a faithful, for an ex-Mormon couple, that's one thing. But for a faithful Mormon couple, you were like anti-Mormons. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, the kids thing was really, we both were always on the same page about that, thankfully. And we just both have been really hesitant to do that until we were mentally, emotionally, physically, financially ready.
Right.
And like, we are only now getting into that territory. And I honestly don't even feel that bad because I'm not even as old as my mom was when she had me. So like, I'm doing just fine. And so I have no qualms about that. But that's all of that context to say when Spencer was like, this conversation with this friend about what it's really like to be gay and to be raised as a Mormon was how he kind of said that was like what tipped you over the edge. That's in context of all of this other stuff. Of not only my spiritual journey, my physical journey, our trying to get our sex life like going for the first time. Anyway, and that was just a game changer. And like, and then to have our friend tell us the realities of this. And he also had some interesting experiences working with some members of the 12 in more of a business capacity before they became apostles, and just like interesting stories that way. And it just all of a sudden was like, all right,
we gotta look under the hood.
Yeah, time to look into some things.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo back what John was saying, and that's just so interesting that you guys all have always struck me as people who are very intentional. Like Lizzy's story, like she knows what she wants to do. She's a go-getter. Spencer, obviously, in your own way, and like these are not lazy people,
right?
They're very interested in bettering themselves and being the best version of themselves. And I thought it was so funny when you did the fitness competition. I talked to your mom about it at the Hale Theater. I'm like, what's Lizzy up to? She's like, oh, she's doing a fitness competition to get back, like to get, you know, in shape. Yeah. I was like, of course she did. She couldn't just like lose a couple pounds. She had to be like, I have to be the best at losing weight, you know? Like these are people who are very committed to self-development. Yeah. And a lot of people I think will resonate with your journey, because a lot of people just don't find those tools within the church. They find good enough ones, like the ones we were talking about with, you know, people on your mission in Guatemala. There can be a lot of reasons. Yeah. My parents, your parents, the reasons why they convert to the church.
Great tools, good structures.
Great tools. And I remember when we were first deconstructing our faith kind of at the same time, if you guys don't know, me and Lizzy kind of talked things out as our faith was deconstructing, and recognizing that both of our parents being converts has a lot to do with their testimony being very unique to them, but them wanting to then foist that onto us of like, hey, we found this, like Lizzy and Carah, we found the right church so that you don't have to.
My parents literally would say that to me. We chose this so you don't have to.
Exactly. My parents said the same thing. And so I love that.
How does that relate to the personal agency of our journeys here on earth? But, you know, okay.
Yeah. And so it's just like, I just see two people who were very interested in being the best versions of themselves and letting the church be the vehicle for that as far as it could take you, but
and like,
still be
boy,
interested.
Did we push it too. And
that's a
first
great
of all,
way to put it.
That's a really kind thing to say. A, thank you. And B, you're absolutely right. Because we, like I said, we would laugh when people said, oh, don't move to California and leave the church. Because we considered ourselves the last people who would ever leave. It is great. This is a comfortable vehicle. We are cruising along I-15 in our low Mormon vehicle. Why would we ever get out of this car? And then you realize that life involves some off-roading, and life involves some rocky terrain. And maybe the vehicle that we have, maybe I just need a different vehicle. It's not a bad vehicle. It's better than a lot of other vehicles. It's just, and like I said, I kept adding all the other tools to the tool belt. Like it just was all part of it.
Until those tools just weren't exactly relevant, because you had so much. I just love your discovery, your spiritual discovery of having that confidence and stuff, where you're like, that discovery is not the discoveries I had when I was at BYU were the things that gave you enough spiritual oomph to get you forward.
Totally. Yeah.
Like that was the gas in the tank, but you found a different fuel.
Sure.
And I love that part of your story.
Well, thanks.
And to extend the metaphor a little bit, I mean, it sounds like you added so many non-LDS tools to your tool belt. I could imagine you looking at that tool belt and saying at some point, why are all these tools secular or non-Mormon?
Right.
And what is the church actually adding when all the tools that are in my tool belt are completely not Mormon?
Yeah.
I mean, that's worth asking.
Totally. And that is a good question. And it's interesting because I would say you really dug into, like you said, the policy stuff, right?
Yeah. Yep.
The policies around LGBTQ led you into the blacks in the priesthood, led you into polygamy, led you into
and half history, half policy.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you're telling me about this, and I'm like, that's not a good look, church. Like, woo, okay, well, that's interesting. You know, that's kind of how I was taking it at first. And but you know, it's different times, different generations. Prophets aren't perfect. You know, I knew all the justifications. Meanwhile, I'm working on my body shame, my physical shame, my honestly, I keep joking about treat culture in the church, because that's actually something that I literally worked on in therapy, was that like emotional eating is built into being a Mormon in so many ways. And I've had to actually face that in another book I highly recommend, Intuitive Eating, just learning to let your body have what it wants instead of restriction and then binging on mint brownies at the ward social or whatever.
Those mint brownies, though.
So I'm kind of doing all this self work, a lot of it realizing it's tied up in the church and shame and guilt. And then you kind of kept looking, and I started looking and it's like we were on two different paths of study and journeying that then sort of converged. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't even tell you at what point. And we just kept telling each other, things we were learning. And I'd be like, oh, here's a cool meditation technique that I learned. And you'd be like, oh, here's an interesting factoid about the blacks and the priesthood's policy in 1978. And then I'd be like, well, here's this tidbit. And you'd give me an interesting, and we just kind of were going back and forth until suddenly it was like, will you send me that? And then I'd read the same thing and it was like, no, send me that. And we both just started syncing up. And this was probably January of 2018 is really when that's when our friend came to Anaheim. And that's when we really started digging.
Let me ask, because I know this was a problem for me, it's a problem for a lot of my friends. How did the church's, I guess it was rebranding, whatever you want to call it, from Mormon to calling Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, how did that hit you?
It's an interesting thing.